Okay, hi everybody. Welcome to the Back to School September edition of our Cloud Cafe. And what a relevant topic we have for the back to school season. So just as a reminder before we start, we have we'll be recording this session, and all of our today's Cloud Cafe and all the previous ones before it will be on our YouTube channel. So please feel free to share after the fact. I know a lot of people sign up to this and then watch it at a later date, but feel free. Any of our speakers will be able to share their screens if necessary. But I do have a backup of James's just in case there was any issues there. If you have a question, then feel free to drop it in the chat. So how we usually run these is that we have all of our speakers do their presentations, and then we'll do a big round of questions where any of our speakers can answer any of the questions that come in from audience members. So feel free to drop it in any time. I know that sometimes our speakers like to answer in writing as well as we go through. So we've got 4 fantastic speakers joining us today. I'll do a little introduction of our first speaker, and then I will hand over to you, Vix, to kick us off. So today's session is around education and whether or not the education system is giving young people the knowledge that they need to thrive in a green economy and to be a part of helping restore nature's balance. So these are some of the kinds of things that we'll be discussing in today's Cloud Cafe. Latest GCSE results have led to a renewed discussion on levelling up education across the country and whether young people feel secure in the knowledge that they can be agents to change for a greener and more sustainable future, and that we don't have an education system that is leaving us behind and or not prepared for the reality that we face in coming years. The first person who will talk about this subject is Vix Lowthion, correct? Tell me if I got it wrong.
That sounds fine to me.
Okay, fantastic. Who is the national spokesperson on education for the Green Party and a Green Party Councillor on the Isle of Wight, and has also been a very successful parliamentary candidate. And I know Isle of Wight will be one to watch in the coming years. So Vix, thanks, and take it away.
Thanks so much, Jenny, for that very nice introduction. After a packed Green Party conference in Manchester, it's actually really nice to take some time out this evening to really delve into how we can green up education. So I'm really looking forward to the discussion and hearing from everybody else. I really think we're at a turning point when it comes to education. We've had 14 years of Conservative rule and a new Labour government, and it's a really rare opportunity to rip things up and start again. But I don't think the signs are great. I spoke at conference about a new Labour government and the Education Secretary. I actually likened them to the senior leadership team and SLT and kind of how popular they can be. I think it's more inspiring than what's gone on before, but the reality is we're not really getting ready for the radical change that we need to meet the challenge of the climate crisis. So, for example, they want to look at Ofsted, but they're going to change a few more words rather than a radical overhaul. They're going to look at curriculum and assessment reforms, but through a new advisory group that's dominated by academy chains. And they're going to address child poverty, but through breakfast clubs and not wider measures such as removing the 2-child benefit cap. I don't really think that they're getting the scale of what needs to be done, standing on a platform of change with a massive majority in Parliament, but I'm not sure they've got the courage and the guts. But enough about them. I'm not going to sit here and talk about that. I think we need to move on from talking about structures, because when the climate crisis continues to hit, the seasons shift, the flooding comes, we need our children and young people and adults of the future to demonstrate fluency with some vital skills. The first one, the most obvious one, I think, for me, is resilience. Every report, every news item about young people, if it's not unfairly criticising them for gang culture and knife crime, talks about mental health crisis. We have in the UK the accolade of being having the unhappiest children in Europe. And no wonder, because schools seem really focused on exam results. We've had youth services cut, art, sports and music opportunities slashed, and it removes opportunities for greater autonomy. Childhood seems to be relying on cars, computers and classrooms, and we need to get young people outdoors. And I think more importantly, outdoors and making mistakes. Second skill I think we need to improve upon is resourcefulness. And that looks at the breadth of the curriculum. We specialise in England, especially, far too early in comparison, especially to our other nations in Europe, where even at sixth form level, they're still able to have a breadth of curriculum. We're also too academic. We don't have enough on problem solving. And when we're going to have to meet problems and work as a team, we really need to improve on resourcefulness. And in key with that, the third skill of collaboration. Modern jobs are going to rely on people collaborating. The demands of the business community, the demands of our own local community, all forms of work, care work relies on collaboration. And instead, what we seem to be applauding are silent corridors where people don't even talk to each other and classrooms sitting in rows. And I think we need to make sure that we focus in schools on collaboration. Fourthly, confidence. Private schools are particularly good at this. We've got a mental health crisis. We've got an increase in my classroom. So I've been teaching for 25 years now, which I think makes me a veteran teacher. I see an awful lot of shyness and anxiety and inexperience in acting proactively. This quite often stems from removing of arts and oracy and all of those wider sports opportunities and also social occasions. And you need confidence to have the can-do approach for a crisis, be able to roll up your sleeves and say, come on, we're going to do this, we can lead. And I don't think we're focusing enough on that. And finally, agility. Adapting to all our future needs, we need to be able to quickly change. Flooding, food shortages, storms and heat waves are adults. We need to be prepared to have that change. Greening schools, we seem to see everywhere, especially at primary schools. We get gardening clubs, we get eco schools, we get fundraising for charities, but that's not enough, and certainly not for secondary schools, FE, HE, universities and adult lifelong learning. We need to have a curriculum and to have initiatives that are focusing on those skills with adult learning opportunities in local communities as well. Because we've seen in the recent crises, COVID and cost of living, that as a society, we're just not ready or swift enough to go far enough to help. So we need to be resilient, resourceful, collaborative, confident, and have agile citizens. And if we have that, then we are going to be equipped to get through the climate crisis. The depth, the breadth, and it's global as well as being local, and we need to be prepared. And we can wait to shift the curriculum nationally. We can keep pushing Labour to make necessary steps to meet the extent of the crisis. We can get more Greens elected on councils and in Parliament. Or as teachers and educators, we can try and get more organised ourselves at work and in our communities to bring forward programmes at an even more local level. But I'm a busy teacher, I'm a parent, I'm a councillor. I'm not sure I've got the energy or the time left to do that. So we've got to be more organised and work together on it, which is why I'm going to look forward to hearing what other people have got to offer about the opportunities that we give to young people. Because if we can support our young people and or the adults around them as well, we've got a real opportunity, especially right now, with what seems like the start of not only the September of the new year, but the start of a whole new government and the start of a whole new opportunity in that way. If we can manage to harness that, who knows? Thanks very much for listening.
Thanks so much, Vix, and thanks for kicking us off. Greens love a whole system approach, don't we? We don't want surface level anymore. We've seen surface level changes not work for us for the last millennia, and so we always love to shake up the system and have a whole system change. And I think what you're saying there around not just like refocusing what the curriculum says, but refocusing how we approach learning, how we look at children, how we look at family involvement and those kinds of things. I thought it was really interesting what you were saying about cuts to sports and socials and arts, and now we've got a whole generation of people who are struggling with more anxiety or not being confident in their abilities, or not being confident in engaging in school in a full and complete way, maybe, and that maybe that's had an impact on them in feeling that way. So really interesting, and thank you so much for kicking us off. So the next speaker I'm going to is James Boyle, who is a geography teacher and school sustainability lead, who previously worked in youth work and took part in environmental campaigns. James has also been elected as a Green Party councillor in Chalford. Congratulations on being a councillor. I think
Thank you, Jenny.
are on mute. Oh yeah, perfect. Thanks.
And just to say, that was fascinating, Vix. Absolutely, really interesting to hear what we can chat about afterwards as well. So I'm a pretty novice teacher. I moved to teaching about 4 years ago. I started training 4 years ago, so this is my 4th year teaching. But I wanted to talk to you today about the but before that, I was working in climate campaigning, so organising lobbies and marches and all that kind of stuff. So I've been around for a little while, and what I've noticed when I come into teaching is that I was actually relatively surprised at the opportunities that are out there to try and get some environmental education into the young people. The reason I went into teaching because I recognized that if we're going to be making a change for tomorrow to the system, we're going to have to work with our young people and engage with them and going forward. Obviously, you know, it's cheesy, but you know, they are the people of tomorrow. They are the future. So what I wanted to do was to tell you a little bit about the practical activities that are happening in education, as far as I can see as a teacher, that have been set up both from the policy level, but also what we can actually do on the ground in school, and what we've managed to do at Henley Bank, which is a school in Gloucestershire, where I am a geography teacher. So, see if I can make that work. Right, okay. So 60 million people are in education across the country. So that's a huge amount, a huge bank, a huge resource of people that we can tap into. And I wanted to start with the Build Back Greener agenda. Now, as you might have guessed from the name, this came at the tail end of the COVID pandemic, so it has come under the last government. So who knows how much of this will remain. But what really took my eye while I was training in 2021 was this white paper that came out on sustainability and climate change. Now, what this told me was that the government was really taking notice of what the actual issues are ahead of us and looking at some of their responsibilities. Of course, never enough. Okay, this is a Conservative government, but at least they were doing something. And the Department of Education recognized their responsibility. So if we look at first at the education focus, with the net zero agenda, they recognize that there will be almost 500,000 new jobs by 2030. Well, you're going to have to skill up all of the people that are going to do those jobs, right? Whether that is in engineering, renewables, whether that's in nature recovery or some sort of energy efficiency or something like that, those young people are going to have to not only have the skills, but they're going to have the interest in it as well, right? They're going to have to feel invested in this. So they've started to bring in things like green apprentices and these skills-focused T-levels, which are slightly like apprenticeships, which are focusing on people who may not be as academic and encouraging them to take on much more skills, much more sort of vocational skills. And crucially, I think this idea for careers counsellors, I think sometimes these, particularly for year 10s and 11s, doing their GCSEs. These are sometimes the unsung heroes of a school where they're helping to open up the world to these young people who otherwise they walk through the school gates, they go home, they don't really know what's out there. The careers advisors have this big role to help them understand what opportunities there are. Now, personally, I didn't know what I wanted to do when I was 16. I barely know now. So they don't tap into everybody, but they do for some. The Department of Education also recognised that these school estates are a massive opportunity for them to make change. 36% of emissions from the public sector are coming from these educational facilities. Now, those are from nursery to further education, but that is a big stat of emissions where they can actually make those progressive moves forward. And there's a lot of land. Now, I know a lot of sports fields in inner city schools have been built upon in one way or sold off one way or another. It's not as much as maybe there used to be, but there is land within a school which is underused and can be used creatively if we can. For example, the boundaries of the schools are often underseen because there aren't as much sports programs, there aren't as much opportunities for young people to go out and play. They are crammed inside those classrooms constantly in the corridors, and sometimes you'll have a huge, certainly some of the schools that I've worked at already, you'll have a huge playing field, but the school is almost fenced off from the playing field because they don't want those children to go out and sort of explore that area because you can't control them in the same way. They talked about building resilience. So recognizing that even the new builds need to be prepared for these extremes, whether it's flooding, whether it's extreme heat or water scarcity, they're recognizing that they need to build that into those new builds. Again, as a caveated, I don't know if that's actually made that into current policy on school builds, but it's certainly part of the rhetoric. Energy efficiency, we know that these schools from the RAC issue, that a lot of these schools, they were built kind of shoddily. I mean, they're still standing, but they weren't built to a particularly high spec. So there's a lot of work to be done there on making them energy efficient. And there's a push for schools to have these climate action plans. And I was listening to what Vix was saying on really having enough to do as a teacher, having to develop a climate action plan for an entire school. And if that lands on just one teacher who has an interest in these things, that can be an added issue. Schools are big. They purchase a lot to keep everything going, whether it's the kitchen, whether it's the canteen, whether it's the exercise books and the like. There's a lot that we can actually tap into to try and deal with the waste issue and the procurement that they run. I'll get back to that in a second. And what was really interesting about this paper was that it would be how a school performs at these would be rated through Ofsted. That was the idea. And now you're noticing that in a lot of schools, there are people who are taking on extra roles as sustainability leads. They're being given a little bit extra money, we call it a TLR, to do sustainable projects around the school because they're recognizing that either the academy chain or whoever the senior management is, that if Ofsted came in, they could judge them on the fact they're not meeting this sustainability agenda. Luckily, though, well, at the moment, there seems to be a skill shortage amongst people who know how they can actually turn their school into a kind of sustainable engine for the community. However, they're trying to tap in, they're trying to deal with that as well. So there are programs out there for teachers, things like the National Education Park, working with household names like the Natural History Museum or the Royal Horticultural Society. They are developing resources. Some of them are pretty high quality as well, quite easy to use, which does make a bit of a change. That if you are a sustainability lead, or if you're a teacher with an interest in these things, then you can pick those up and try to come up with some ideas and see how it could fit into your school area. A lot of these resources also have links to the curriculum. So how can you run classes in design technology? How can you run classes in geography or science, or even maths or otherwise, with a kind of a sustainability lens? And they've also got these climate action awards through this national programs, National Education Nature Park, which they haven't got a huge amount of information on at the moment, but I'm guessing that is going to encourage people to push their school forward, because these schools are, particularly through the academy program, these schools are sort of encouraged to compete against each other. And if you can have an award that's over the academy chain down the road, that's going to be seen as something that you want. Other ones that are out there, I'm sure many of you heard of eco schools. You get these target areas that you then use the eco schools resources to work on with your kind of eco committees of passionate young students. That's what we've been working on at my school. Surfers Against Sewage do some great stuff on plastic free schools, really engaging stuff, particularly for primary schools. And there was one which is slightly more local, from the Ministry of Eco Education, which is funded by Ecotricities Foundation, which actually work with MPs and others to run a kind of dragon's den of sustainability idea for students across the school. So what we managed to achieve last year was an eco schools program. Around the boundary of our playing fields, we planted around 40 trees. Councils, and there's quite a few programs out there that are giving away free trees. They're quite keen to do this with schools. Obviously putting up positive nature projects like bug hotels. We did lots of litter picks, which is the kids were desperate to do. They seem to love going out there and picking litter for, particularly when we talked about how many animals kind of die because of litter every year. One thing that we didn't have was recycling bins. And it's ridiculous because there's so much waste in these schools, particularly like plastic drinks bottles, that recycling bins just seem so obvious, but it hadn't been taken. No one had taken the step. I think, like Vix was saying, everyone's busy in a school, right? No one had actually taken that step. So we set up the recycling bins and started this culture of recycling in the school, as well as some drive to get more people cycling to school. So just some ideas about what I think we should do going forward, how we can really kind of keep pushing this. So there's definitely opportunities to have cross curriculum focused studying, and there's resources out there, but you have to get the buy-in from the SLT, because they feel that the curriculum is so tight, the days calendar is so tight. To have things like drop-down days where you're taking the students out to talk to them about what you might do. Climate action days, for example, is really, really tricky, particularly once they get past sort of year 8. There's a natural history GCSE, which I'm sure you've all heard of. I don't know a lot about it, but it does just show a kind of, shows to be progress is being made. Yeah, absolutely. Progress kind of caveated with our own sort of despair and anxiety for the future, but there is a sort of drive forward in education which fills me with some sort of hope. One area that I found really interesting was that the anxiety level that Vix was talking about in young people, much of that comes from this kind of environmental anxiety. You know, we talked to them about how the world is changing, how the climate is being impacted, and there is a child psychologist, I can't remember her name right now, who talked about running climate anxiety cafes, climate cafes in school. So I've done a few of those with a school I've worked at before with the teachers, and it's amazing when people come together and you talk to them about it, you give them a platform to talk to about it, they really you're really all feeling the same thing. I haven't been brave enough to do it with young people yet. And finally, this is something I'd love to get your opinion on, is how do you think we could get more secondary school students involved? Even though I am a secondary school teacher, when you're in primary school, it's very easy to do this. Primary school kids absolutely love it. Once they get to secondary school, adolescence kicks in and it's just not seen as cool. And I would love to find those hooks that really engage those sort of adolescents in this area. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, James. Great to have a bit of a different perspective on this, but also obviously some of the key themes always come running through. I like what you're talking about around the Build Back Greener program, and obviously the skills focus that it gives, which I think one of the things about the just transition is about reskilling people and those skills that can be used in like a new green economy, which I think is very interesting. I know that what you're talking about around sort of climate action plans. So I work with the Association of Green Councillors, and to me that seems like we should be providing like a template of a climate action plan that our councillors can go to their local schools with and say, do you need one of these? Because if you don't have one, then we've got one that's created by green councillors and, you know, working with teachers and stuff. So I've just written that down as an idea to take back. I also know, for example, that the National Education Union, who were exhibiting at our conference this weekend, have a local councillors network within it now. And I know that they're getting a lot of pressure to look at green issues, greening schools, those kinds of things. So another thing to think about, but I'll definitely take that back to our policy advisor and see. He's actually was a teacher in a previous life, so I'll see if there's anything that we can do to offer to our councillors that they can then have as something like a quick wins guide, even something as simple as that. Like you say, they're not even recycling. If there's not recycle bins in a school, how can you be talking about that recycling agenda when there's no infrastructure there to support the change? So very interesting, and appreciate your time. Okay, I've got Anna Finlayson next on the list, but I can see Robin. Is Anna here? Is Anne here? Sorry.
Anne is here. Anna isn't, but Anne's here.
Anne, sorry, Anne. Sorry,
right.
I can only see 5 little faces now. So I was just wondering. Okay, yes, I can see you now. So Anne is the CEO of Sustainability Environmental Education, also known as SEED. I'm so sure some of you will recognize it. And is an award-winning educator and facilitator. So Anne, thank you so much for joining us, and away you go.
Thank you. I think this is going to be slightly different because I've been in this game a long time, probably since the 80s. So, and I've had experience of teaching outdoors, indoors, in schools, teaching teachers, teaching national park rangers, etc. So, yeah, when I say that, I feel quite old, but anyway. And I'm actually going to go back. So thank you, James, and thank you, Vix, from current teachers. But I'm actually going to take a step back in what I'm going to say. So just taking the words greening up education. I mean, one of the things I want to say first off, absolutely, and this won't sit well with teachers, but education is political. And teachers are always told they cannot be political. They have to be as as circumspect as possible. They have to show balance and all sorts of things that they are not allowed to do. And that has got worse in the last 15 years. But it's always been political, with the small p and then at times with the large p. Even if you go back to the history of education when it was the church that ran it, before 1878, that's when attending school became compulsory in the UK. But I thought I'd tell you a story just to show you how political it can be. I went to do a teacher training activity, a session at Cambridge University, I think just before COVID actually. And they were actually, they were doing their teacher training actually in schools that day. And then they came for a session, and then we all had dinner together. And so I had sort of 10 minutes to explain education for sustainability. And someone put their hands up and said, but we can't talk about sustainability, and we can't talk about climate change. These were primary teachers. And I said, oh, why not? And she said, because it's political. I said, so climate change is political? And she said, yes. So I said, so what, do you not teach it then at all? She said, oh, no, we do. I said, well, what do you do then? She said, we call it air pollution. And that shows you exactly, and you can still find, young people in secondary schools now who will talk about air pollution before they talk about climate change. So I think it had quite a big impact. And the reason they were told that climate change was political is that Michael Gove decided that you couldn't learn anything about it because it's too complicated until you were 16. The fact that it's a social, emotional, economic, as well as an environmental issue seemed to pass him by. So for 15 years, we have struggled with education for sustainability and climate change. And I'm actually going to use those words together because I don't think climate change, when people talk about climate education, I think they mean the content. I don't think they mean the sustainability, knowledge, skills, and the breadth that sustainability contains. It's not just me, but there's a lot of people now who are reflecting on the last 15 years, obviously, as Vix was saying, and James, and it's really nice to hear you talk about, the lovely work that that's been pushed inside the Department of Education. But it's a reminder that it was one man. His name was Jonathan Dewsbury, and he's now been sent over to deal with the RAC issue, but he's also trying to embed sustainability into school buildings. And he's an engineer, really passionate guy about sustainability, and was so scared about his young kids eventually going into school and not getting any of this, that he got frustrated, and the Department of Education was going to leave. And they said to him, what do you want? He said, well, I'd like to do this stuff, but you're not doing it. They said, okay, you do it. So he started 4 years ago, just himself, 4 or 5 years ago. And then it's become, last time I heard, it was up to about 30 people. And it's become quite crucial. And they've survived through the last few years of the previous government, but very carefully and very politically. So there were only certain things that they could do or say. And it's been very interesting to be part of the advisory groups on that, and I continue to be. But it's also an interesting insight to how the system of education through government, both at the political end and then at the civil service end, how that operates, because it is not that easy. And I'd be very happy to help anyone who wants an insight into that to explain that, but I'll explain a bit more. So where we are now, despite the lovely work that, obviously Vix and James are doing, and others, but they are quite often isolated. They're often people on their own. And I was one of those teachers. I was the lone person in a school. There's nothing worse than being, a champion and everyone else thinks you're doing it all, when actually sustainability is all of us. It has to be all of us. And we have to model that to students. So the problem of the last 15 years has been that climate change and sustainability, all of this has been marginalized. It is on the fringes. It is not mainstream education. The current curriculum fails to address this. Mostly you'll find it in geography and a bit of science, but not everyone does geography. So that's at secondary schools, to answer your question, James, that's quite an issue, because if you're not doing geography, you often quite miss out on the climate change or sustainability stuff. But the third thing, which is quite worrying really, and this has come to me from a whole range of places, is the dominance of consumer choice, as though that is the answer to sustainability and climate change issues. And the story I'm going to tell you is a colleague of mine who's been in this field for the last 25 years. And he runs a charity called Students Organising for Sustainability, SOS. And he has a 15-year-old or 14-year-old daughter, and he was watching her preparing herself for her exam. And she had a standard exam question that she had to try and prepare, and she was making little cards, as you do. And the question was, what are the positive benefits of climate change? And he obviously thought that was quite an issue, quite a worrying question, but she didn't, because she had the answers, because she'd been taught the answers. And the answers were growth, innovation, economic opportunities, and becoming a world leader. I mean, if I hear the word world leader yet another time, it is absolutely the political dogma of the last 14 years. And he was so worried about it, and there was nothing else. That was the only question that she was asked to prepare for. So you come to this question about, and it is very tempting to think about all the little things that you could fix inside education, and will they make the fundamental difference? So I was delighted to hear that the Greens like a whole system approach, because I'm with you. I'm absolutely with you on that one. And people like David Orr and Stephen Sterling, who's lovely, lovely man. He's sort of like one of the world gurus, lives in Dorset, very, very shy, retiring man, but a great thinker. And I've known him a very long time, 25 years, but he's been doing this work for probably 40. And they both sort of come to this conclusion that the problem is not what's in education. The problem is not in education. So it's not about fixing little bits here and there. The problem is of education. And what do we mean by that? What we mean by that is nowhere, absolutely nowhere, will you ever find anyone who's written down the purpose of education. Nowhere. And it's not in the Education Act, which is, the statute that everything is supposed to fall off from, although Michael Gove changed quite a lot as well. In terms of the curriculum and who is responsible to him, basically, to the Secretary of State. He's no longer there. So there's nothing in the Education Act about the purpose of education. There was, for a time, something in the national curriculum under New Labour, in the purpose statement at the beginning of the national curriculum, but that got taken away. And so SEED, which has been around since 1968, and you have to wonder how long we're going to keep pushing stuff and how long it takes to make change happen. So SEED has been around as the Council for Environmental Education since 1968, with the express purpose of encouraging government to put environmental education into the curriculum. 50 years or so. So what we realized was that the only place to make the kind of systemic change that we need in education was to get it in the Education Act, because that was statutory, and lots of things fall out from that. So I worked with RSPB and a group of about 40 organizations, and we came up with the words that actually lots of people use, but we thought putting those into the Education Act, and we had the place where it was supposed to be, all of that, and it was a viral thing. Anyone could use it, and anyone could go to their politicians or parties and say, look, this is what we should do. And the basic point was to say the purpose of education is to develop the knowledge, skills, values, and attitudes that help you learn how to care for yourself, care for others, and care for the environment. No one disagreed with that. But the problem was we weren't talking to the people who are in control or who decide what's going to happen in education. If it does go into the Education Act, it would affect teacher training, it would affect Ofsted, it would affect the national curriculum. So it would flow out in all directions. Lord Jim Knight, who was a Minister of Education under New Labour and is now in the House of Lords, in 2021 actually got onto one of the 25, what are they called? Private members' bills. And the one he wanted to bring in one, and he wanted to use this. So I worked with him for a while on that. It got through the House of Lords. Everyone thought it was a great idea. It got through the first stage of the House of Commons, but it ran out of time, as almost all private members' bills do. They all run out of time, whether deliberately or not. It just didn't get through. But most people, and people from parties of both sides, actually thought getting this in the Education Act was a really sensible idea. And why do we need a systems change rather than tweaking at bits and bobs here and there? Because the evidence for the last 40, 50 years is that things come and go. And I'm back to education is political, because people with ideologies come in and they change things. They get rid of stuff. So you would not in 2011 find the word sustainability in any government document anywhere, websites, policies, nothing. Why? Because George Osborne decided that sustainability was expensive. And as we know, he had policies that were all about saving money and cutting back. And so you could not find the word sustainability anywhere. I got a call from the Department of Education because they were doing a whole rebranding and under Michael Gove, and they were about to pulp boxes and boxes and boxes of materials that have been created collaboratively with teachers, with NGOs, and it was really starting to be used by people. And I got a call from them saying, if you don't come soon with a taxi, all of these materials are going to be pulped, and then no school's ever going to be able to use them again. So we went with 2 black cabs in London to the Department of Education, load them up with these boxes, and then for the next 5 years gave them away at all of the conferences that we did. But I thought that was appalling, that, you know, something that had been created with public money was just going to be pulped because someone had decided ideologically that you're not going to use the word sustainability. So again, everything is political. But in some ways, I had the same sort of hope, you know, that UNESCO, who were pretty slow off the mark, and the UN, and now this Sustainability and Climate Change Unit at DFE are all really pushing hard and really trying to get something done and something in place. And there's a lot of good stuff that you think, oh yes, this is good, but is it happening? And I am probably with Vix here. I am slightly anxious because they've just announced a curriculum review. Now, I'm never going to say that levelling up is not a good idea. I'm never going to say that we absolutely need to do more for, you know, the millions now of young people who are living in poverty and with all sorts of deprivations that, you know, we shouldn't be exhibiting in a apparently civilized country and a rich country. But so we've got this curriculum review that the Secretary of State has announced, and it's a review, not a reform, but a review. And it's going to be run by Professor Becky Francis. She was the CEO of, or is the CEO of EEF, which is the Educational Endowment Fund. Basically, you have to prove that something is effective. So how that works or not, I don't really understand, because I think it's a bit dodgy as an ex-scientist. Before something will be funded. But if you look at the words of the review, it sounds like it's going to be quite good. It says things like they're looking at things like the knowledge and skills to thrive as citizens in work and throughout life, and that the curriculum should remediate blocks to good citizens and reflect the issues and diversities of our society. Well, can't disagree with that. But the problem is they never mention sustainability or sustainable development or climate change. And the people that they've got on that board, not one of them is in any of those areas or even an associated area. They are all people who are part of the current system and strongly embedded in the current system. I mean, interestingly, you know, John Huckle, who's written a paper which he sent to me today, has actually said that he thinks we should actually challenge all this by having alliances. And he suggests that he's part of Labour, to be honest, as much as I can tell from his paper. He's definitely part of Labour. He thinks there should be a socialist approach to sustainability education. But he thinks the alliances should be with people like the Green Party. So I'll just pop that there for you. But I'm actually going to now say a word of warning. Don't be seduced by the Weasley words or the great words that are coming out. Some of them are lovely, but they get interpreted in different ways by different people, or even the tribes. There are dozens of tribes out there who all feel they've got the bit of sustainability or climate change, or they've got the solution, and they compete with each other for noise and resources. And the reason they do that is it's a really limited opportunities that they have. So let me give you some examples of some of the words. So one of the words at the moment is
I'm just gonna have to give you one more minute. Sorry, we've just got another speaker, and then I'm sure people will have questions at the end. So if you just 1 or 2 more minutes, that would be great.
Okay, so words that are out there are things like transformative. You know, people talk about collaboration, but actually you don't see much of that happening. I'd like to point you towards Our Shared World, which is actually the first time some of these tribes have come together to collaborate. You talk in your blurb at the beginning about agents of change. So James, we have a program called Young Changemakers. And it's an approach that embeds all of the education for sustainability methodologies. It's participatory. It starts with where the children are, the young people are. It's for upper secondary. It is to absolutely to try and overcome their feelings of anxiety, anger, despair, disempowerment. And we've been trialing it in Stroud, and we have a school now in King's in Gloucester that will be doing it this coming year. And it works. And it works because it's about systems, it's about change, it's about action learning, called action learning cycle. It's about participation, doesn't rely on teachers being experts or teaching. And it's about building hope. And we know it works because we had a big event in Stroud Subrooms, and it was outstanding, absolutely outstanding. The young people ran the whole thing. They did all the talking. And here's the indicator that I think it does work. They all think they're going to carry on and do something next year, either the project that they thought and they want to just get better at it or do more on it, or they want to try something else that they think will be more impactful. So greening up, I feel, is the wrong words, because that sounds to me like you're going to tweak away, add things, improve on what's there, just add stuff at the top. It's not. It is about reimagining, rethinking education, if you like, regenerating for a future that is not the one that previous generations who designed education system were imagining. It's a new future. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Anne. A completely different perspective there, but very interesting. I love your line of education is political. I think all of those different areas are. I worked in the NHS for 10 years, and although they desperately try to remain apolitical, health is also a political issue, and I think same goes there. I added the Young Changemakers course link into the chat, so everyone have a look at that. I'm sure it would be very useful for you guys. But yes, Greens are definitely all around system change, and as somebody who has 2 parents and a sister who are secondary school teachers, I can see sort of the crippling effects of austerity on education. And when you add in sustainability or environment onto teachers who are already under-resourced and underfunded, it's a very difficult conversation to have. So inspiring the young people is the one. And get them to drive the change as well. Okay, thank you so much for that. And I will move on to our next and final speaker, who is Robin Ellis Cockcroft.
Yeah, both
And
my
they
parents
are
are here. So.
both your parents are here.
Cockcroft, yeah. Otherwise, Dad will pop
Ah.
up in the chat and correct you. So.
Okay, sorry.
Don't
Apologies,
worry.
Mom and Dad.
Don't worry.
No
Don't
problem. So they are the finance and fundraising coordinator from the Radical Youth Space for Education in Stroud, co-founder of Extinction Rebellion Youth. Robin believes in the revolutionary potential of education, not as a tool of schooling or conformity, but as the process of giving young people and the wider community power as change makers. Great bio. Thanks for
Thanks,
joining us.
Jenny. Thanks, everyone. I'm going to share my screen. My laptop's being a bit laggy, so hopefully this works. And we'll flow from there. Can people see the slides? Yeah, everyone's
Yeah,
faces have
yeah, we
turned
can
white,
see.
so it must be working. Okay, so just really wanted to start here before I introduce myself a little bit more with this basic understanding that for us as the Rise, education is part of our name. We see education from that root understanding of educare, the idea that it's the practice of drawing people into their full humanity. It's an incredibly beautiful thing to us. And one of the things that we feel like people miss out too much from it is that part of that is that you have to equip people with the skills and the power to change their world for the better, because that is so much of what makes us human, our ability to shape the world. And so in this, when we're talking about greening education, we feel that it's that thing of a specific focus on learning, on the learning needed to re-embed humans as a positive sibling in the web of life. So what is it that will allow us to actually act in pursuit of like a pro-life society? And again, for us, that means giving people the ability to counter the anti-life parts of our society. In a very basic way, we ain't getting fucking anywhere if we've all got herb gardens, but Shell still exists. And so we need our herb gardens, and we need to build up the power to take out massive polluters. And for us, that's what greening education is all about. So as the Rise, exactly like Jenny so gratefully introduced me, we came out of Extinction Rebellion Youth. So it was a group of us who got together, direct action, protest, what can we do on the street to meet the climate emergency? And in 2021, we realized that what we needed was a space to really learn together. There's an awful lot of young people trying to change the world right now. And the problem is that they have very few spaces in which to build it. So we've been building a home for youth activists, for young people who aren't activists yet, who want to get involved in it, to learn, to share deeply, and explore the process of change making. We would say it's our answer to this concept of greening education, something that we would call the planet repairs curriculum, which I'll talk about more at the end. And of course, as you can see on the right, we are trying as hard as we can to base ourselves in the legacy of radical education from ancestors such as Paulo Freire and others. So we've only been going for 3 years so far. I've got less experience than others in this chat, no, others on this call. But as I've just turned 30, but as the designated young people, I want to bring a little bit of fire. And so another one of our amazing ancestors that we use a lot is Dr. Amos Wilson. And he said that education is good to the fact that it allows you to solve your problems. And when you do not educate your children to solve the problems that will confront them or us as a community, then they are being miseducated. And this is where I want to start this conversation, because we feel like people too quickly jump into how is the perfect way to do education, what is going on, what are the tiny little gains that are being made within this kind of, really like what Anne was saying, what are the tiny little gains that are being made within this system that really isn't serving us? And so I just wanted to ground us in this understanding that things are beyond bad, like just really bad. I spent all my time working with young people who are actively trying as hard as they can to look at the state of the world, whether that's the climate crisis, whether that's the mental health crisis, whether that's capitalism just destroying any chance that they have of getting a house, getting a job, building a livable future. Things are really bad. And one of the understandings of that is like, we've got a quote here from one of our young organizers, and she said, "I know more friends who have tried to kill themselves than know how to grow their own food." And we have to remember, this is the generation for who the fossil fuel dream is dying. On the right here, we have the graph of acute hunger around the world. For decades now, fossil fuels, yes, in terrible ways, using horrific pesticides and everything, have been driving down hunger levels around the world. That's failing now. Yeah. The system's falling apart too much. There's not enough resilience left in our food systems everywhere. And hunger levels are starting to shoot back up, obviously fueled by conflict and all these kind of things. But if we've got an education system that is not teaching people to grow their own food and instead is teaching them to solve their problems by freaking killing themselves, then we're going to be in an awful situation when this continues to climb and when this comes home. And anyway, I'm carrying on. Got the bits to say and I get carried away sometimes. So this for us is the step one. This is tell the truth. I think Anne started it. I want to carry it on. We must stop lying that school is an inherently positive or even neutral thing. There are far too many examples, obvious examples of school and of education spaces being used for heinous activities. Whether that's the Indigenous boarding schools in Canada, which were just the tip of the iceberg for how schools were used all across the world, how they're being used right now, like the schools clearing Adivasi young people out of the forests in India, turning them into these utterly unskilled, utterly dependent citizens. Whether it's the Highland clearances in the frigging north of this country, you know, and these islands that ripped people away from the land and forced them, sometimes at the point of literal like electrocution, to learn how to speak, you know, how to drop their accents and learn how to do different things. The very fact that the school was built as a factory pipeline. Obviously, now we understand also the school and prison pipeline. There are enough examples of times when school has been used as an awful, horrific thing that we cannot lose sight, again, of that understanding that the educator has a duty not to be neutral, and that we must decide exactly how we want to educate. And to do that, first, we must decide how are we being miseducated? And so if right now we're being miseducated, we have to say that what we're being taught is to continue a society built on death and destruction. And we need to name that. I want to see the Green Party going out and saying, this is clearly what our young people are being taught in schools, and this is utterly wrong. And one of the ways, for example, in a small way, we've been trying to do this with the Rise, is last year I ran a workshop called School Hates Farmers. And this was intergenerational workshops. I ran a session where I had a 16-year-old who a year ago said to their careers advisor, I want to be a farmer. And their career advisor tried every single method possible to tell them not to be it. I also had a 76-year-old in the room who said he tried to be a careers advisor. And he said that his teachers at the Catholic boys' school he was at literally beat him to tell him that that was a stupid idea. We have the same idea of our connection with the world now as we did then, as we did from the beginning of schools, because schools were set up to rip us away from the land and to put us into factories. Yes, there have been amazing, incredible teachers throughout that process. Yes, we've won a lot of beautiful things. The right for everyone to be educated is a great thing. And there is a sickness at the heart of this education system. And so these are the kind of sessions we do where we're trying to unearth not just the pro-education, because I could have called this, let's talk about farming. But instead, we've got to name the miseducation and then build into the true education. So that for us is step 2, is fighting this miseducation by helping people solve their problems. For us, that's all real education is. Like we said at the beginning, it's helping people have the power to solve their problems. And so just in a glib way here, I've written power mapping is more important than Pythagoras, guys. We must, at the Rise, what we talk about is equipping people with the skills of change, the abilities to build campaigns, to run movements, to get community organizations going, to feel like you can act on the world, to be a democratic citizen. Power mapping allows you to say, who has power in my community? Pythagoras allows you to say, what is a friggin' right angle triangle? Don't worry, guys. I actually studied renewable energy engineering for 4 years at uni. I'm not against maths. What I am against is the idea that it should be the only real thing that we're taught and venerated above the idea of giving us practical skills to get out and act in the world and solve our own problems. And so on that second one is like, let's get young people in schools solving their community's problems. Let's break down this idea that there has to be a fence that removes young people from the community. We're totally against the idea of like the national curriculum being the be all and end all. We think communities have to get in and help solve the school's problems as well. And if that means you've got skills in the community, bring them into schools. If that means the community's got problems, let's get the young people working them out. An amazing example from Australia was when they used the new basics model to get young people doing a biological survey of their river to counter the pollution that was coming into the river from a mine upstream. They then used that biological survey in a court case to help defend the village's rights. Imagine those friggin' 12-year-olds, 14-year-olds who were doing that, and how empowered they felt to feel like they'd learned something that was really useful to their friends and families. And I think for me, this is one of the key things. Another part of this is we have to stop ignoring the radical family around us. I went to West Africa earlier in the year. There's incredible things happening in Burkina Faso about the Pan-Africanization of the education system, of all of the different people around the world who are fighting back to take control of their education system. Indigenous communities educate, say like we've been working with indigenous communities in Peru and Colombia, who educate their young people in completely different ways that are so based on equipping them with the skills necessary to fight for life and to be ecological members of their community. Let's work with those guys. Let's find out from them what they're doing and how they're organizing. And so we try and bake this into some of our work. Again, we're just at the beginning of this, we're just learning. But last year we ran a campaign called School as a Crime Scene. We think it is. We name it as that because we think young people and their communities need to get in and need to say, how bad really is this? What are the ways we're being miseducated? And how is it that we can work alongside our teachers, alongside our local politicians to take back control of our schools? And on the right here, at the moment, we've built a youth assembly in Stroud to start getting a wider voice to understand what young people really want. That's the basics of democratic education. Because if if young people don't have the space to articulate what they want, build their own manifestos, how are they going to have the space to be able to fight for it in the community? So both of these are ongoing projects. You can talk to us about them. There's loads of stuff in there. We've got zines. We've got lots of information that we'd love to share with people. But these are our small attempts to say, how do we problem solve our way into power? And that's the final bit. This is the end. We're getting to the end. Step 3, build power to win planet repairs. We're part of this amazing network in the UK, but it's also around the world called PRELA, the Planet Repairs Action Learning Educational Revolution. And one of the key quotes in it builds on the concept of planet repairs, which has come from our Pan-African family, come from the International Social Movement for African Reparations. And it says that education is preparation for reparations. And by reparations there, we mean the deep, deep repair of our communities, of our knowledge forms, of our understanding. Repair for the historic atrocities, such as the transatlantic trafficking, such as colonialism. These are all things that we must repair. These are all things that are at the heart of a society that is deciding to carry on destroying the world around us. And key to this, one of the things I want us all here to really say is, how do we take back the power in our communities to educate our young people and ourselves? We have so little access to our schools. We have so little access to our universities. And it's a key piece of us to say, if we want to repair our ability to be powerful people, to be powerful communities, then we've got to see that as part of this reparatory process. And again, work with our family all across the UK and the world to do it. And I just want to end in that real truth of what this is, because I can't look a 15-year-old in the eyes the other day and not say that we're in anything other than a fight for life on Earth. If we're looking at a planet that might have a carrying capacity of 2 billion by the end of the century, if we don't do stuff, then I'm looking at that young person who was born, some of the ones I'm working with now, they were born in 2005. It's quite likely that they might see more than half of the people they know pass, die, starve, whatever in this life. That is just fundamentally not okay. And I want us to own the frigging horrificness of that and act like it. And sorry, I'm really getting quite emotional here, guys. Like, I just want to feel like we're saying this is what we're here for, that we're in for this fight. I'm going to finish, Jenny. I'm going to finish. You can join us in the autumn. We've got this thing called the Decolonial Open Community coming up. We've got Indigenous activists from Peru, from West Africa, coming to the UK for over a month. We'll be hosting a bunch of different educational events that people can come through for, see what people are doing all around the world. And I just want to finish with this thing. I've got one of the young people behind me here, and I just had to put this in, because don't lie to the youth about the state of everything, because they won't forgive you if you don't give them the opportunity to fight right now for a world that they want to live in. Thanks, guys. That was me. I hope that wasn't too intense.
No, it was great. And also, you know, the world is burning, so intensity is necessary. Bring the intensity, is that what we say in the Greens, you know? You got to, like you say, honesty is key. I really enjoyed what you were saying. I think what you talked about around educators cannot be neutral, how we need to learn more about how we've been miseducated. I think so many of us look back on our education and we think, like, why were we only taught about one aspect of history, when in reality so much of what has happened in history before would have taught us to not repeat history. And because we have no idea what's happened in terms of, especially in terms of colonialism and like the impact of the British Empire on a global scale, as British people, it's really a huge missing thing. And I think that so many people don't realize the sort of impact that that's had on future generations in terms of our knowledge of like immigration, the food systems, food security, all of those things are highly impacted by what happened in our history. And because we never learned about that, because all we ever learned about was like very small piece of history. Loads of great things that you said. Identifying the problems in an honest way, creating skills for change. Loads of what you said talked to education's the inequality of education. You know, like I know one of our other speakers mentioned like private schools do this well. I'm sure they do because there's loads of money in them, and our public school systems don't have the funding to be able to put into environmental education always, or like James was saying, you know, there's one tired teacher who's been asked to do the sustainability plan and they don't have the brain capacity or time to be able to do that. Also really loved what you were saying about getting communities involved in schools. I've taught in 3 different countries now, and the approach that they take is so much more community based. It teaches communities the importance of communities, but like you say, it's problem solving in action. It's really beautiful to see. I'm working currently on a project around antibiotic resistance and the importance of getting schools and communities connected to each other, because communities don't always have opportunity for education, whereas schools do. So many great points, really interested in your project, and would love to learn more. And okay, I'm going to shut up now and ask some of the questions, get some of the questions. So to all of our speakers, if you could just all the speakers, if you haven't got your camera on, put your camera on. We'll get someone to ask their question, and then any of you feel free to jump in. It's basically like whoever unmutes first is up for number 1 slot. But obviously we'll hear from all of you. Okay, so question from Rebecca Dixon. Sorry, Rebecca Dixon Wilkes. If you want to unmute yourself and ask your question, then go ahead.
Hi, as a parent, my daughter was the reason why I got into politics. But how can I, as a parent, educate her to be more eco-friendly, etc.? Because I believe education starts at home as much as it starts at school. So what can I do to help her and possibly go to the school and help them too?
Great question. Okay, thanks, Rebecca. So who's jumping in first?
I don't know what age, Rebecca, your child is. Is it primary or secondary?
She's year two, secondary. Yeah, it is.
In secondary, okay. So is she local? In a local school?
Yeah, County
in Stroud. Okay. There's lots of ways to do that. One of the things that we encourage schools to do is to do something called a whole school approach, because it's the whole community, and it's not then left up to one person to do it. What you can do at home is the modeling stuff. I mean, you know, I was a ranger, so I was really into nature and outdoor stuff. And at one point, my 11-year-old said to me, as I got very excited about watching a thrush wash the slime off a slug before it ate it, I got really excited about that. And she just looked at me and said, "Oh no, Mum, not more bloody nature." And I thought, oh no, I've got this wrong, but I haven't actually, because, you know, at 11, that's what she thought. But, you know, she's just got married, and, you know, it was supposed to be an outdoor wedding in a meadow. So I'm like, okay, maybe I didn't forget this, you know, maybe I didn't actually get this wrong. So it's a long-term task, as all education is. So it may not be on a day-to-day basis that she does things. But I bet there's something in the school. She could be at a school in Stroud that's doing Seed Young Changemakers, so she could join that if she wanted, and then be with other kids and work collaboratively on projects, which would be encouraging. or they might be doing eco skills. They could be doing a range of things that they might be doing. But the biggest thing I would recommend is if they've got a school council, is that she asks the question about, you know, what is the school doing? You know, do you know what you're doing in sustainability? And if you don't, you know, there are audit tools out there for you, whole school approach audit tools. And the best way to do them is to get a large number of people working on it and coming together and talking about it in the same way as those eco cafe type idea. Once you get people working together on something, it really does. But it might be that you as a parent go in and ask that question too.
Thanks, Anne. Robin?
Yeah, thanks, Rebecca. I messaged you in the chat saying we can send you some like magazines and stuff for her to read if she wants as well. But I mean, for me, it's really like one of the key things here I want to really emphasize and that we work a lot with young people in is like to really not separate the ecological and environmental crisis from the rest of the crises that are going on. That might be the thing that she's most passionate about, and that's great, and that she should work on that. And the key thing we would say in whatever field and whatever you want to change as young people, the only thing we can really do is get behind you and say, like, we really want you to be powerful. And we want you to be as loud as hell. And I'm right up behind you, and I'm going to defend you in being as loud as hell. And if that's on one side, like we've got schools here in Stroud where they do this like mustering thing, where they get the young people to line up, you know, 3 times a day, and they go around and measure girls' skirts, and they go around and shout at them for moving and these kinds of things. It's a freaking crime. And if that's the place where as a young person you want to be like, no, this isn't okay. Let's get a petition together. Let's get people in the local community understanding what's going on. Let's get them involved. Cool. If you also want to say, let's get a school garden set up. Let's get that set up. If you want to say, friggin' hell, I hate the patriarchy, and I'm going to get a campaign going on at school because I've got this leery ass PE teacher. Nothing against PE teachers. I love PE. But then again, like this encouragement to support her as best you can to become, basically for me, like become an activist, become someone who's actively learning about how to change the world. And if that's scary as hell to you, then again, we can point you in the direction of a bunch of people who run trainings. We run stuff. We do lots of intergenerational stuff. And we'd love to talk more about what that looks like. But it's really about saying like, the reason the folks who are destroying our world get away with it all the time is because they're also using the schools and other things to disempower us. And so how is it that we can get active, get engaged, and then build those processes of power building so that we can counter it and make it exciting? Like it just is exciting. Like she'll meet some amazing people along the way.
Great. Thanks, Robin. James?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Rebecca. Yeah, I think in terms of the practical, how could you tap into the school? They're desperate, right? People, like teachers are tired. They need advice. They need help. If there are people who are motivated to do that, which at secondary school just happens less and less, right? I've got a couple of people, girls at primary school. A lot of the parents are involved, right? It's this really exciting time to be involved as a parent as well as for the kids as well. But when you get to secondary school, it's much more difficult for a parent to be involved because, well, the kids don't necessarily want it, but they go through the school gates, and there is that separation, like Robin was saying, right? There is that gate there. It's quite a tall one, a tall fence. So I think letting the school know that that this is something that you want, obviously. Encouraging your daughter to do the same thing, having that two-pronged approach. But as outside parents sort of being involved, if there are teachers who are interested in the school, they will definitely appreciate that. They'll definitely appreciate that. And yeah, and you know, bite your hand off, I think. I certainly would.
Thanks, James. Okay. We've got lots of other questions, but also, Rebecca, I think just being like here and asking that question is more than a lot of people do. So just like opening up the conversation for you to learn and for your daughter to learn is like a beautiful, inspiring thing. So thanks for being here. Carol, if you want to unmute and ask your question.
Hi, everybody. And thanks very much for some really thought-provoking presentations. My question is it possible to green the existing system, bearing in mind that it's set up to in effect, to reinforce the status quo and to educate or train young people to fit in with the existing society. Is it possible to change it in such a way that it's actually equipping pupils to deal with what they're going to be faced with, which is going to be a very different society? And in order to do so, they probably need to challenge a lot of the assumptions of the existing society. So the only way I can see to do it is sort of under the radar, without the powers that be realizing what we're doing. But I'd be interested in the speaker's thoughts on that.
I've been asked this question a lot of times, Carol, and I get to the point where, you know, I just think the answer is a revolution. But, you know, to be honest, I think you actually have to get politics out of decision making in education. You have to put education back into the hands of professionally trained teachers who are thinking about what they're doing. You know, everything they're doing is based on what they're trying to achieve with the kids in front of them, and that is not necessarily based on someone else's decision about what quality education is. And when people talk about impacts and the outcomes of education, they are just talking about exams and your ability to regurgitate knowledge. I mean, there are some skill subjects. I mean, I was a maths teacher, so you know, that was one of those things. But mostly when they talk about quality education, they talk about passing exams and heaven help us, PISA. And once you understand what, you know, schools in China do and Singapore and how they cheat, you know, it's like, why on earth are we even bothering with these, you know, these international campaigns? So it might, I don't know how you do that, but the problem is that the government thinks that the money that they take in from taxpayers that goes to education is theirs, and because they've been voted in, not necessarily on an ideology on education. Very rarely does anyone ever say what their ideology of education is. But then because they're in, they've got 5 years to do whatever they want. So for me, you have to change that system. I can see Robin's nodding his head. I'm starting to feel quite radical here. That's lovely.
Thanks. Okay, well, let's go to Vix and then we'll go to Robin. Thanks.
Cheers. Yeah, I was going to say that I think that successive governments are afraid of committing to things like that because it's going to cost loads of money. But I absolutely agree with what Anne was saying about if you change the way in which education is measured, then you can change what education is. So at the moment, the measurement is GCSEs, SATs, attendance figures. They absolutely dominate education and in terms of schools. But these things don't matter on a dead planet. If we change the way we measure schools, then starting exactly like Anne was saying about defining the purpose of education, there is a definition slightly longer than 2 lines or whatever in the current Green Party education policy, and that's currently being developed. And if you want to get involved in that, there's lots of opportunities through the working group. Defining that purpose of education and as well as what sort of qualities do we want in young adult citizens, then we can work out how to achieve them. But whilst measurement is dominated by quantitative exam testing and attendance figures, then that isn't going to change. But it's not massively revolutionary to be able to do that, to change the way in which you measure schools. You've still got schools there, you've still got the institutions there, you've still got teachers there, you've still got the way things are done. But if you change measurements, you can change a whole lot of things behind that. And exactly, get rid of PISA tests. They're not remotely interesting.
Thanks, Vix. Let's go to Robin. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, ma'am. How do you say this? So when we were running the stuff about schools of crime scene, we talked about the idea that like there's different power players in changing the education system. And like one of them is obviously politicians. Great. Let's get the Green Party doing some amazing policies. Another one of them is teachers and teachers unions. Great that the teachers unions are back up and kicking a little bit. Let's get them back up and kicking a lot more. Let's empower our teachers. And key to empowering our teachers is getting the wider community to get behind the teachers when they are pushing for things within the school, exactly like James was saying. That's really great. The third group is the young people themselves. And for us, this is the point that no one ever talks about. And I don't understand why. Because if you look at the country in the world right now that has the most emphasis on its education packet, it's Chile. So Chile puts huge amount, it's like the most important issue in the entire country. And that's because back in 2006, there was a thing, 2006, 2005, there was a thing called the Penguin Revolution, where the entire country, every school in the country got occupied by young people. Well, first they went out and they did huge protests because of the privatizing of education. The protests got shut, and then they occupied every school in the country for months. And they won off the government a rescinding of the bill of the privatization. 3 years later, this turns into huge student protests. 5 years later, it turns into bigger student protests. Every time, the education bill is the #1 thing the government is talking about. Yeah? Here, no one talks about it. But there, the students were able to put it on the absolute top of things. Another example right now, the bad education movement in Thailand that kicked off in 2018, 2019. Students demanding that education was the #1 topic that anyone was to talk about, and has now led into an incredible political party that has one change. In Chile, Gabriel Boric became the president, and they won the chance to rewrite their constitution. It's not all plain sailing. Lots of these processes are bad. But we have to think about the way that teachers are hamstrung, about how unions are hamstrung, about how politicians are hamstrung, and that the card that we never play is saying to the young people, okay, if you agree this is shit, we'll agree with you that it's shit, so let's friggin' change it. And the only way you're going to change it is if you learn to fight for a different form of education and you start building that yourself as well. And I think those honest conversations with young people, with young student leaders, is what it's going to take to really unlock a massive wave. And it's out there. Like, don't tell me it's out there. Like the young people who were just like occupying their schools last year because of the frigging bathroom rules, because of all, like when you talk to the young people, they're palpably ready to say enough is enough. But no one's going to, just no one goes to them and say, okay, if enough is enough, let's do this. Let's get organized. Let's back what you're trying to do. Let's build your power, and let's use that to really change things. So I think for me, that's key to it. And how we create, like, it's obviously what we're trying to do, but I'd love to hear how other people think, like, are trying to create those lines of communication with young people to empower them to take it to the next level.
Thanks, Robin. Give me a shout if you want to come back on that, anybody, or just unmute yourself and start talking. James.
Wanted to this has been a really inspiring evening, but I just wanted to say that I don't understand how it's not clear in this country that education is literally the only answer to so many of our problems. I mean, it just sounds so obvious, right? Like, obviously, if you teach the children about that you're not meant to be a misogynist, right? If you teach young men how to behave around young women, if you teach them the future that they're going to inherit, then obviously they're going to be better prepared for it, and we're going to have a better society 10 years down the line. And it sounds, I didn't know about that movement in Chile, but I mean, it sounds that is exactly what we're missing here. And I think that the reason we don't have it is because for as long as I remember, teaching has been disrespected, right? It's been talked down in it, and it hasn't been given any kind of you know, I used to work out in West Africa, right? And people used to say, you have to just listen to a teacher. They love their teachers. And their teachers, you know, they used to beat them and do horrible things, to be quite honest with you. But they respected the education they were getting, right? Whereas you just don't get that here. And schools can be you have to really fight for that respect. And I think, I know Vix, you was talking about, and Robin as well, this sort of crime scene of these schools and how strict they can be. My experience, the reason that they are that strict is because there's a greater sense of disrespect for the teachers that are in there, because there is. I mean, I'm just coming up with this on my head, so work with me on it. But there is a and in they're not always the calmest places to teach, and so because if you speak to parents afterwards, when you've said, oh, you know, I had to put him in detention because he was, you know, threw his paper out the window, you often get a load of abuse from a parent, right? Because there is that lack of respect for those teachers. And I think if we can somehow try and flip that so that there is a bit more there, we can start building that framework to have a better better respect for education as a whole.
Thanks, James. Okay, I'm giving all of my speakers a pre-warning now. I'm going to ask you for like a 1-minute take-home summary in a second. So people used to complain that I surprise attacked them with this. So I'm just going to do a little summary now while you all have a think. And like, what do you want the people who are here and the people who are going to watch this after the event to take home with them? What is the key message from you or from your organization or from the young people that you work with? So first of all, I just want to say thank you to everybody who's joined us tonight. I think it's been a really inspiring conversation, and I think it's one that doesn't happen enough. You know, we talk about the plasters that we can put on the education system to make it greener or to force it down some sustainability path that it's maybe not ready for or set up for or doesn't have the resource and capacity to properly facilitate in a meaningful way. And so many of the things that our wonderful speakers tonight have said around the need for true youth engagement. Young people are educating themselves every day through social media. When I wanted to know something as a child, if I was lucky, my mum and dad would have bought an encyclopedia, and if I was even more lucky, some kind of information would have been in there that was useful to me. Nowadays, they can find anything out just by Googling it, and they have this whole world at their hands. But it's also a dangerous thing because there's too much information, and it's difficult to be able to have the tools that you need to be able to find out what is real and what is not. So talking to young people, having an open conversation, finding out what really matters to them and letting them lead the change is something that really needs to happen more often, and that governments are often so far from. The need for investment if we want system change. Money speaks. I hope this Labour government invest in our education system and give teachers the respect that they deserve. I know exactly what you're talking about, James. I've taught English in Mexico, in Spain, and in Madagascar, and the respect that there is for teachers there, and the respect that there is for education as a tool for social mobility or a vehicle for social mobility is tenfold on this. Identifying the players that are important in making this change happen, also incredibly important. So many interesting things. I hope loads of people watch this, and I'm going to tell them to watch it because it's been really, really fascinating. Now I hope that I've given our speakers enough time to write a few notes down of what they would like our audience to take home. Anne, as you're not muted, I'm going to pick on you to be our first speaker to give sort of the final 1 minute of words.
Thanks. Sometimes my mute could work and sometimes it couldn't. I don't understand that. But anyway, number one, it's every child's right to have the kind of education that would prepare them for their future. Not my future, but their future. And that right has to include acknowledging their anxieties and acknowledging their worries, for them to have a say in what they'd like to learn. And this is actually fundamentally what's in the Seed Young Changemaker program. But the other thing I want to say is, so first of all, I think it's not just a few kids in a school, you know, led by the dinner lady on an eco school thing. You know, it has to be all the kids in the school. And I don't think I'll ever give up hoping for that, whether they're in school or some other organization. Secondly, the biggest issue that we have is we've got to try and get people to understand the way they think about young people. And there are two models of this educational philosophy, if you like. One is the empty brain model, where people imagine that a kid comes to school age 4, empty-brained, nothing there, we fill it up. They leave school at 18, ready for the world. There's absolute rubbish, but a lot of politicians believe in that. And you can start to hear it in the language about, we will give them these skills, we will give them this content, we will give them this knowledge, as though that's going to make it happen. The second model, which is the one that I think, you know, Robin is talking about, and certainly I am, is about competencies that every young person, and I've taught 3-year-olds, already have experiences, knowledge, attitudes, ideas, enthusiasms, and that's what is so exciting about education if you do that in the right way, because it's a phenomenal place to be when you're surrounded by young people who've got all of this energy and competencies. And I think if the more that we could challenge people about their pathetic empty brain model, the better, because we could actually start to shift it. Thanks.
Thanks, Anne. Fantastic. Whoever's unmuted next will go next. So you decide, speakers.
I'll jump in.
Thanks,
I'm
James.
going to leave the final inspiration for the for Robin or Vix, I think. But I just want to say I genuinely believe that that schools can be those agents of change, right? They can be, because, well, they have to be. And we do have the space in schools to teach young people, like tomorrow, this term, to teach young people how they can create a more sustainable world, right? We have them there 5 days a week. So we have them sitting in front of us. We can use the knowledge that we have to do that. But teachers do feel under-resourced. They feel like they don't have the knowledge to do that properly, and we don't have the time, right? There's too much else to cram in our curriculum. And so I think the work the DofE has started to do, Seeds sounds absolutely amazing. The work that you've been doing for decades, you know, that has to be encouraged, so that we are working with those schools to bring in that sustainable education across the school curriculum. And secondly, I think, you know, the students do know, right? They need a bit of guidance and support, and that's our roles as teachers. They do. You can give them the information, show them a platform, and they will come up with a project that they want to do, and you support them to do it, and that just lifts up their confidence massively. So I think there are huge opportunities there within the system we've got, that we can do tomorrow, and I think we should grab them with both hands.
Happy
Great,
to go
thanks,
through
James.
my takeaways if you want.
Go on, Vix. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. My takeaways for this evening, I've been listening to what everybody's had to say, actually, and what's come straight through for me is the clear slogan, tell the truth, that education is political, and we've got to change how we measure and we judge not just schools, but teachers and pupils, to give them autonomy to learn in a meaningful way, to work collaboratively, to have ownership. Creativity and creative subjects aren't a nice to have. They lead to creative problem solving, and we really have got a lot of problems in society that we need to solve. But those problems that we've got in schools that we've outlined, behaviour, respect, and so on, they're not the problems of schools. They reflect the wider society and the inability that we've had to support our citizens and our adults to support themselves. If we're going to create schools that spoon feed towards exams with short-term consequences, then we're creating a society which is people are expecting to be spoon-fed solutions towards short-term consequences. I think we've had a brilliant, amazing insight and experience that we've heard from Anne, and some fantastic ideas for schools right now from James. And I'm with Robin. I think we really need to create rebels, confident, resilient, resourceful young people that we can trust, that are going to be the leaders of the future and are going to help us to meet all of those demands that we face.
Brilliant. Thanks, Vix. Go on then, Robin. You can finish us off tonight.
Well, it's actually not going to be me, because our Meg, who's part of the team, wanted to say something, because she was like, "You're the You can't be the only young person in the call, Rob. It's not fair.
Brilliant.
You're not
Do
even
it,
young
do it, do
anymore.
it.
Hello, I don't know if
Amazing.
if people can see me all right. I've just been lurking in the background of Robin's screen for the rest of the call. But I asked him if I could take the last little minute, and I think the main thing I wanted to say is just like, I mean, I don't know who's in this call, but it definitely feels like it's a shame that I'm the youngest person who's spoken, and that even I'm not somebody who's currently in the education system. And I think, agree, it's been a really interesting evening, but it's also, I feel like that also needs to be humbling. Like, how can we make these conversations feel more relevant to young people so that people really want to be here? Like, how can this Zoom call be something that is actually like led by people who are in the school system, and not people feeling like, you know, I've been in spaces before where I've just felt like a token at best and at worst irrelevant. And if these conversations aren't serving young people, then what are they doing, and how can we actually move forwards? Because like, when is it enough? Like, I feel like we've covered a lot of like how bad the situation is, and I hear lots of the reasons it's difficult to change stuff. But if like the climate crisis we're facing, if like all the stuff we've covered about how bad the situation is isn't enough for us to take more bold steps, and I actually don't know what is. And I feel like history's shown us how change can happen through people actually taking steps to really challenge the status quo. You know, when are we gonna riot? Because things aren't changing as they have been, and I feel like otherwise we're just drifting more sadly and slowly into a crisis that we can see coming without actually being brave enough to face it head on. And yeah, I see what like the challenges of that, and that's why I feel like a lot of it needs to be led by young people.
That's us.
Magic mic drop, and you guys have even got a mic. You got to be dropping that. Amazing. Okay. What can we say? Yes, in Stroud we have a chronic issue, especially in the Greens, across the board actually, of getting diverse representation. You know, Stroud is beautiful, but it has a demographic, and I think that we need to work harder to break through into new communities, and that definitely includes more young people getting involved. What an absolutely inspiring night. I really didn't know how this one was going to go, you know, and you're like, oh, education, what's it going to be talking about? But I've been inspired in 4 completely different ways. I hope everybody who's on the call has been too. Thank you for those final words, Meg, and whoever Meg's friend is in the background there as well. Thanks for joining us. There's so much potential for change. Of course, we all want a riot, but maybe we need a riot and something else, you know, maybe we need a riot and we need some more support for teachers, more funding for teachers. Let's put pressure on the Labour government. They have constantly criticised the Conservatives for the last 13 years for starving our teachers of everything that they need, and now they're going to do it themselves. They're going to continue austerity. We need to put pressure on them to do better. But yeah, who was it? It was Rebecca, wasn't it? Tell your kid to riot, man. Like, we're all old and we can't riot that good anymore. We've been rioting for 20 years, it feels. We need the next gen of rioters. Let's do it. Protesting. Sorry, I should say protesting, no riots. Good, positive protest. Let's do it. Let's support the young people. Let's encourage them in all of their actions. And to all of our teachers, we think about you every day. We know it's an absolute bloody slog right now, but please continue to do it. Don't leave and work at Lidl. We need good people in the education and pushing from the outside as well. So thank you to everyone. Thank you to Elizabeth, as always, for organising this. We'll be back next month with another Cloud Cafe. Come along. We would love you to be there. Tell all your friends. Thanks for joining us. Thanks, speakers, for giving your time and energy to this subject. And we will see you on another day. Have a good one. Bye, guys.
Thanks all. Bye.
Guys, absolutely love that. Thank you so much.
Cheers, James. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks,
See-
everyone.
See you in the streets, everybody. Big love.
Big
Hope
love.
you do.
Bye.
Bye, guys.